Hey guys, welcome to my channel. We are reading Open Book by Jessica Simpson. We are on chapter 18. We're also going to be reading chapter 19 today as well. So I'm just going to start reading. Chapter 18. They let you dream just to watch them shatter. December 2006. I was in my suite at Mandarin Hotel in Washington, D.C. Out of my gown after the State Department dinner, hosted by Condoleezza Rice the night before the Kennedy Center honors. Steven Spielberg, Andre Lloyd Webber, and Smokey Robinson were among the honorists. And of course, Dolly Parton. The next night, I would be on stage at the Kennedy Center. One of the lucky performers chosen to sing in tribute to Dolly. She's my idol, the queen of my one-liners. She's the deepest of people, but can find the light in anything to make that depth. Hilarious. Steel Magnolias is everything to me, and I know her version of I Will Always Love You. Before I knew Whitney's, but I felt closest to her as a fan during my divorce, listening to her song Little Sparrow over and over. It's a song about the fragility of hope and how it can be crushed by men. Her vocal on that is astonishing, and I bet she did it in one take. The concert would be taped to air on CBS later in the month, and I got to sing 9 to 5. I thought I was ready, having rehearsed many times on set in Shreveport, Louisiana, where I was shooting Blonde Admission, a working girl redo like Luke Wilson. Between scenes, I wasted time in my trailer fighting with John on the phone or over email. He would accuse me of making a fight out of everything. But there were times he would bring up someone from my past just to have something to be jealous about. I stopped journaling because my self-esteem was so low that I thought anything I wrote was stupid. I lost focus on my work, which was obvious, at least to me, if not everyone else. When the director's aunt, Penny Marshall, came to the set to do a camo, it was a huge opportunity to impress a film legend. Penny Marshall has directed Big and A League of Their Own. Plus her brother Gary had directed Pretty Women. Wow, Pretty Women. I remember reading that book. Pretty Women. And a million other romantic comedies. This was the family to impress, a chance to prove myself to someone with unbelievable connections to the industry. The old Jessica would have been right there ready to be the Goldie Hawn or Bridget Barton, whatever their scripts called. Penny and I had one scene together. I needed more than a few takes. I should have nailed it. I told everyone, including myself, that I was just intimidated, but really, I hadn't fully prepared. Still, I got by. No one ever said a word. And now, I was in D.C., out of my gown, and ready to check my email. My plan that night was to get to the bed early, and instead, I was soon on the floor crying. John had broken up with me via email again. He had followed it up by sending me a song, Aerosmith's Angel, a 20-year-old message in a bottle that I wasted near about the entire night trying to decode. It's about begging someone, to save them from their love, which is exactly what I always wanted to do for John. It was so high school, I know. What the heck? Notion that the secrecy deep cheerleader was going to save a hot band geek from the path of destruction he had put himself on. But that was the kind of roles we played over and over in our relationship. It was a usual complicated word problems of dating John. If a tortured artist hurls a nasty email at 10 p.m. and then a love song at 11:20, are you up or down? I called him, but he didn't answer. I was left to listen to that darn song over and over when I should have been listening to 9 to 5. I was a mess all the next day, and it was a blur now when I started drinking. I know I started backstage at the Kennedy Center. My mom had helped me into the breakfast at Tiffany style black strapless cocktail dress with a diamond necklace. I looked the part for Jessica Simpson, but I just had to trust that she was going to show up. Shanae Twain was there warming up in the staircase behind the stage to get the reverb. She seemed nervous, which scared me because I admired her so much. There were so many great walks around. Reba McEntire, Reese Witherspoon, Alyssa Cruz, and Vince Gill. And I keep going back to my dressing room where the McLean was. You need to not be drinking, my mom said. This doesn't make me drunk at all, I replied. Okay, whatever, she said. But yes, it does. Ken was trying to lift my spirit as I ran through the song, making up fake lines to be funny. I started repeating them, confused. My mom saw me take another drink. You need to put that down, she said. I had never gone on stage drunk before. My dad was anxious, but he didn't say anything. I think we all trusted that I would show up when I actually got on stage, the same way I'd always done my whole life. Just before it was time to go on, John called me back. I was ugly. How could you do this to me? I asked. Why do I have to be thinking about you all the time? If you were going to let me go, let me go. I tilted my head back to keep my makeup dry. I think he hung up. He wouldn't talk to me if I was drunk. And if I finally realized I was, Reba kicked off the tribute, introducing a video she had narrated by Dolly's life. It opened with the first haunting line of Little Sparrow, and my entire body tensed. The video then showed her as a kid singing her way into radio shows and leaving for Nashville the morning after she graduated high school. I thought about my life and what Dolly had done with the gifts God has given her. She'd written down so many songs, and I was afraid now to even write in my journal. When they played the snippet of I Will Always Love You, I lost it. Having big, hyperventilating sobs and the dress I wanted to burst out of, a necklace that seemed to choke me. I began to pace around, and who knows how many people were staring at me. It came time for my part. Reese Witherspoon went out to introduce me. And of course she was perfect. The band started 9 to 5, and I waited for God to save me like he usually did. I'd get by. I got through the first verse and chorus, and I was gone. I got lost and had no confidence to turn these lyrics into a song. I couldn't understand the melody, the phrasing, or the tempo, and I didn't know how to get back in. I looked out at this bright room. I saw the president, all these dignitaries, and then Dolly. She looked so concerned. The band stopped, probably expecting me to start again, at least for the cameras. I'm so sorry, I said to her and to everyone. It's an honor to be here, but this song is too good for me. I'm so nervous. I turned, and as I stepped, I started to hop to the wing, a childish move to pretend None of this had happened. I ran to my parents, who were in a full panic mode. They kept repeating, "What are we gonna do?" They were still so used to thinking we would lose everything if I messed up. George Stephen, the producer, sent someone to ask if I wanted to redo when the show was over. My parents said yes for me in the dressing room. It was like someone had died. I kept staring at the printout of the lyrics. They all blurred together. The show over, there was a knock on the door. I assumed it was my cue and stood up, ready to walk the plank. It was Dolly. She was wearing a white gown and sparkled her blonde hair falling around the rainbow medal on her chest. She looked like an angel. "Now, I hear you're going to sing that song again," she said. "Before you do, I want you to know I wrote that damn song and don't even remember the words." Oh, that's cute. It was a lifeline, her kindness and grace in the moment. There are people whose cups ran over, and yes, I worry. I am risking a boob joke here when both Dolly and I are in the frame. But those cups run over with love and grace. She is one of them. That she took the time to make me feel better on her special night will always mean the world to me. I went back out onto stage, and the band was set. The audience had gone home, and it was just be us in the empty opera house. A producer told me they would dump in a applause later. I went out to the mic stand, and I looked out at the theater. With no audience, you could appreciate its beauty, like the red velvet lining of a jewel box. But there was no feeling, no warmth. I had to sing to no one, alone. I tried, but it was too sad. "I'm sorry," I said. "I can't." I looked at the band whose time I had wasted, and I wanted to disappear. I walked off the stage and looked back at the empty seats, and then into my dad's eyes. "I will never sing again," I said. There was an after party, and I didn't want to go. I didn't think I deserved to. My parents made me. "This is disrespectful," my mom said. "You have to go." I recently asked my mom why she was so intent on making me go to the party. That was the thing that I had to do a lot, that I hated. She said, "Making you do stuff because it's business." I'm glad I went. I avoided everyone, but I wanted to thank Dolly again. Reese stood by her when she saw me. She said in a full southern drawl, "Oh, honey." Dolly asked how it went, and I shook my head. "Don't you even worry," she said. She probably knew I'd pull a Cinderella and flee the ball right quick. She gave me her number. "If you need anything," she said, "anything, you call me." The photographer wanted a picture, and Dolly called a bunch of the girls together. She put her arm around me, and Shauna put her hand on my shoulder as Reba hugging me from behind. Reese and Allison bookended all of us. "Smile," Dolly said. And I did. Because you do what Dolly Parton tells you to, even if it's hard. That picture ran in a lot of places for a long time. I hated it. I hated that girl trying to smile in the center of these incredibly talented people. But now I have to learn to forgive myself. I see the bigger picture. I see 4 women and 1 fairy godmother supporting me solely because they knew I needed it. To Reba, Shauna, Allison, Reese, and especially you, Dolly, thank you. I told my therapist this story a few months back about John breaking up with me right before I went on stage. "That's not love," she said. "You know that, right? I mean, he never loved you." She said it so casually, like it was something I should have figured out a long time ago. I felt a dagger right in my heart. Again, I was so protective of him. "What do you mean he never loved me?" He was obsessed with you," she said. "Love and obsession are so different. One is healthy and one is not." I didn't know the difference then. Thank God I do now. It wasn't long before he was back in my life, I flew out of New York City to be with him for a New Year's party. We were in a good place, at least for us, and John seemed to welcome the press attention this time. Our rule was that we would never acknowledge the interviews that we were dating. We'd hide in plain sight. He asked if I wanted to join him when his winter concert tour kicked off in Florida later in January, and I dropped everything. From then on, I abandoned my life to be the girlfriend on the tour bus. It reminded me of when I was touring with 98 Degrees, and sometimes that felt right. And the other times, it brought back memories that made me uncomfortable. You created a family on the road, and there's a feeling of intimacy as you arrive at a new city at 4 in the morning. Though this time around our bed was at Four Seasons, John was a superstar in music, respected by veteran performers as much as he was loved by his fans. People just loved to watch him play, and he brought an improvisational spark to all those years of preparation, playing guitar until his fingers bled. I remember sitting alone at the sound check at Veterans Memorial Arena in Jacksonville, my feet up in the seats as he played guitar on stage. I'd worship Nick in the concert halls, but Nick wasn't always happy when it was me on stage. How would John react to me performing again? I was so intimidated by John's professionally. John was this guitar god, truly one of the greatest in history. He would look at me during certain songs, always reworking the playlist depending on his mood. If I was in the crowd up front, security would take me back to his dressing room during the last song of his encore, so I could be there waiting for John. I think of Almost Famous and sing Tiny Dancer to myself. The LA lady in love with the Music Man, the groupie with her own platinum album, and the clothing business ranking in hundreds of millions. I would periodically take breaks to go back to do work in LA. The paparazzi started taking pictures of John, even when I wasn't around. In the beginning, he made a joke of it, putting an arm up to where my shoulder would be, embracing my ghost as he walked. That's what they wanted, right? Me? He already had fame, but I was paparazzi target, and he'd welcome becoming collateral damage. In early February, Ken and I dyed my hair brown, and I did it because I was trying to be someone new. I was going through a more artistic phase, carrying around my Lissa camera and becoming really passionate about photograph. I was obsessed spending at least 30 minutes on each picture, color correcting and making certain aspects pop. When I mentioned my hobby in the magazine interviews, it became a cue for the writer to sneer at me to the readers. But John encouraged it first. He brought me vintage books of photography and technical manuals. Then he decided to get his own Lessie, and he became better at it than me. Aw, damn. I thought that was my thing. With my camera in hand, I realized the tour was an amazing opportunity for the collection. I would be in the middle of the crowd taking notes of what everyone was wearing. I photographed what women looked and felt good and before it got filtered through some fashion magazine. I wanted to know what jeans women really wore on a date and how high crop top people really wanted. John loved clothes, so when we went shopping together, I would pull luxury items like something from some Japanese designer he was suddenly crazy about and think how I could make that spirit translate to something more accessible to our buyers. I sent a ton of photos back home to the collection, and on the tour bus, I had nothing but time to create mood boards and tier inspiration for magazines. I still wasn't ready to go back to music. My acting career wasn't satisfying me either. I knew the Blonde admission could have been a lot more better, and wasn't surprised when it later bombed. Besides the collection, my creative outlet was simply John. The two of us working at each other like puzzles, not sure if we were putting each other together or breaking us apart. We went on Sony Grammys after party together, and I was so happy he posed for pictures with me because Grammy night is like the prom of our industry. He was nominated for 5 awards and won 2 that night. He broke up with me that night. That is so stupid. He broke up with me that night at the Four Seasons in Beverly Hills. I can't even recall why. I just remember knocking on his hotel room door and begging until he finally took me back in the middle of the night. From there, I joined him on the road to Minneapolis and then Madison. At that Wisconsin stop was Valentine's Day, but he told me he didn't believe in that stuff. Not for cool people. I watched him sing I Don't Trust Myself with Loving You, a song about winning a lover's trust just so you can break her heart and then do it all over again. It was his mo. Set to a gorgeous rhythm of irresistible as him. I sighed and I told myself being with him was enough. The next day we were back on the bus heading south to a February 16 show in Kentucky. Somewhere in Illinois, John had an idea and started calling around on his phone, talking quietly. He told the driver he needed to make a pit stop. He jumped out yelling for me to come along. He took me to the Tiffany & Co. store. We went inside and he picked out a diamond necklace. I've always wanted the first diamond. I gave a girl to be from Tiffany, he said, putting it on around my neck. I told myself this was our Valentine's Day. The following month, he took me to Rome. We had a private tour to the Sistine Chapel, and as I looked up at God and at Adam reaching for each other, I thought of how much Sarah would have loved this. Afterwards, we visited another church, Findy. Oh, I'm just kidding. But we did go, and it did feel like a miracle, because when we walked in, he said, pick anything you want. Extravagant gestures continued, and made my anxiety kick in. The higher he lifted me, the longer the fall would be when I disappointed him. And I know I would. I was still self-medicating with drinking, but doing it less. So now that we were spending more time together, I went along on the tour to Australia the following month. When he saw me start to drink, he stopped me. Don't drink, he said. Try this pill. Just take this and it will take the edge off. It was a Xanax. And he was right. It softened the edge of my fear and anxiety enough that I could be normal and present. But it frightened me into the realization that I clearly had a problem. Not with drinking, but with whatever I was covering with drinking. This Xanax was a quick fix, but for what? I don't know. And I wasn't ready to face it. In Adelaide, a girl working the concert leaned over to me. I asked if I wanted water. She was sweet, my height, and my age, with brown hair. When we were going to hear you sing again, she said with the Australian accent, I smiled. Oh, soon, I lied, turning my face back to watch John on stage. John collected guitars and had so many that there was always one in reach, the way an average person would be with a cell phone. Each had a story like it was Eric Clapton's, and by the way, it was the one he used for Layla. He would ideally pick one up, play some gorgeous melody, and then look at me to join in. I would give a close-mouthed smile. We did not have that spark to make music together, or maybe I resisted it. I know I had moved on from my ex-husband, but I still grieved singing with him. We were great together, where we were at our best. I wasn't ready to share that with another man, even one I was in love with. And John knew. He hated that I couldn't let that part of Nick go. So he presented me with an idea. He was obsessed with the song I wrote for a public affair called Walkin' Round in a Circle. I used a sample of Fleetwood Mac's Dreams, and that familiar tight rhythm allowed me to be a little looser with how I structured the song. I wrote about the patterns I fall into and how fear often keeps me stuck, walking in a circle where I can't tell the beginning from the end. Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis produced the song, and John's idea was to redo it, make it less breathy and more direct, like my With You or his own music. As an artist, I knew he was right. It would be better that way. The song's a hit, he said. I'll produce it. I'll release it. No, I told him. I don't want people to be like, oh, she using John Mayer to better her career. He told me I needed to stop caring so much about what people thought. I don't remember if he mentioned the idea to my father or if I did. But Dad was cheering it on. Yes, oh my God. He would be the best thing ever for your career. But I didn't want my career to be about my relationship anymore. I had already broken my whole heart with that approach. John didn't listen to me. Or maybe he mistook my growing resignation as yes. He went ahead and booked a recording studio for the next time we were in New York City. Chad Francosk, his sound engineer, the roommate, was there, always calm around the storm of John's energy and talking. Anybody would have taken advantage of this moment, and I didn't. So I sabotaged myself. There was a Pinot Grigio, and I began drowning it. You don't need a drink, he said. Just be yourself. You make me nervous. I said, I have to get comfortable. Why do you need to drink to be comfortable? I busied myself by stalling tactics, lengthening my vocal exercises, centering myself, pouring another until I had to get in front of the mic. The windowless studio seemed tighter, more like a prison cell than a place to create. John was on guitar. I don't know if the plan was for him to be backing vocals later or if it would be a duet. I just knew he had a vision for how I should sound. I was worried I wouldn't live up to that. We started in, life is a curveball thrown with a wild arm, and if I'm going to swing it, I must get motivated. I stopped and I said sorry. He said something encouraging, but all I heard was the critic, which is what a producer is supposed to do. He wasn't being out of line, but it brought back Nick producing for me in the studio. We started again and we went on like that for a long time. If you told me it was a 30-minute or 3 hours, I would believe you either way. Just stuck in a dream where the answer is clear, I sang. I had written that song as a promise to myself to change my habits, but now it felt like I was narrating my certain life with John. Caught in this cycle of makeup to breakup and back again, no longer growing into myself. I got to, in my head, wondering if this was God putting me in a position to sing the truth of my life, or John. It occurred to me that I had always done well when I worked to be worthy of God's gifts, and I had spent a year trying to be worthy to John's love. Finally, it was as if my vocal cords became frozen. I couldn't sing. "Why are you doing this to me?" I asked John. I hated it. "I was trying to share this with you," he said. "I can't share this with you," I said. Singing together was what I did with Nick. He looked down and sighed. I tried to continue. "I don't know what to do. I started to cry, feeling like a failure. Maybe I was. I ran literally right out the studio, taking huge gulps of night air. When I got to the sidewalk, after a quiet of a sealed recording studio, New York felt loud. The sound of the traffic moving, the trucks turning, was like a steady crash of waves, sirens here and there, a couple walking towards me, and I coughed to put my head down and my hair in my face. I didn't want to be Jessica Simpson right then. I went to my hotel to hide. I sat on the bed. I hadn't showed up in the studio for not John, but for me. I didn't know why. I was starting to realize John was someone I could focus my anxiety upon. My pain walking around in the skinny pants and a cool scarf. No, I let myself and my song down. It could have had a new life, and I let drinking get in the way. I let my fears get in the way. I used my drinking to cover my fears. I realized in that moment I had let it pass, owning my faults as an easy thing for me, learning from those realizations and breaking the cycle of making the same choices. That's the work. John never discussed it, not once. He broke up with me soon after I was 26. The world at my fingertips, and I let the cycle continue through the summer. I took him as my date to the Met Gala, and then he broke up with me. At the Cannes Film Festival in May, I promoted my upcoming military comedy and then called major movie star, but eventually released The Private Valentine. It was a princess moment, and maybe he saw the pictures of me at Cannes because suddenly he was in love with me again. In Miami, I got to sit next to my mom as we showed at our first Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week. I lost track of if we were back on or not then, of even if we were ever really on at that point. I was having these incredible experiences, and I allowed him to steal my joy. At the beginning of fall, I was alone again. This time I was off the John merry-go-round long enough to catch my breath and stop being the idle woman he had in his mind. I had room again to have a conversation with myself. You're only one who has the power to be yourself, I thought. Nobody else can do that for you. You may have had that lonely conversation with yourself, but if you haven't, let me tell you, you have people encourage you and talk to you all day long about your potential. But if you're not there, ready and willing to be that for yourself, you will never be fulfilled. For me, I wouldn't know myself until I faced my fear and singing again. I had to walk through that fear. I needed to write again, get back into the studio, do what I loved. My first call was to my manager, my dad, and the next was to my friend I knew I couldn't do without, Casey. Casey picked up on the third ring, sounding concerned. I didn't blame her. She was doing a A&R at Sony, fulfilling the dream she started with Teresa's office. I told her my plan before I lost my nerve. So, will you do A&R on the record? That was the artist of repertory, I don't know, creative work of helping choose songs, just as her old boss, Teresa, had done for me in the beginning. She was quiet on the other end and finally said, "I don't know, Jess." "What don't you know?" "If it doesn't go well, you'll blame me," Casey said. "Well, I'm pretty sure it's not gonna go well," I joked. "So let's just do it, and at least I'll have my best friend." "Okay," she said. "I love you," I said. I hung up, thrilled. Now I had to do it. Chapter 19, Return of the Southern Girl, Winter, 2007. We drove through the nondescript neighborhood of Nashville, convinced we had our directions wrong. But we kept going, making one turn, then another. We got to the address. Finally, we arrived at the corner, lots surrounded by politely low saku walls. Casey pressed the button at the low-key gate. A pleasant voice answered. "Good morning," Casey said. "We have an appointment with Dolly." The doors opened, and once again, we saw the building. It all made sense. There was a beautiful stucco and timber compound with red tiles, and at its center there was a mission-style chapel, right out of the Old West movie. It even had a little dome with a bell inside and a cross on top. This, of course, was Dolly Parton's office and rehearsal studio. Dolly and her kindness were the inspiration for me to come to Nashville to do the country album. As soon as Casey, my assistant Adrian, and I got settled in our rental house, one of the Casey's first suggestion was that I call Dolly about the possibility of working together. I was afraid to call the number Dolly gave me after the Kennedy Center. So I made Casey call Dolly's manager, Danny Nonzel, who was so lovely to her. Dolly called me right away and told me to come on in. She did her business, worked between 4 a.m. and 10 a.m. At 7 o'clock, we were her second meeting of the day. "Jess, are you shaking?" Casey asked me. "I am so nervous. I'm just nervous is all," I said. As soon as we walked in there, she was yelling, "Hey!" She hugged me like we were reuniting after a long absence. There are people who embrace themselves so fully and live so authentically that you feel like you grew up with them. That's Dolly. She immediately started showing us around, and the first stop was the chapel, a tiny little candlelit place that reminds you of those rooms tucked away in the hospitals for prayers and quiet reflection. A place where anyone can come and feel at home, no matter what you believe in. She lit the candle for us, and we all prayed together. Dolly put me in such ease. From there, she took my hand and led me to her office. She sat behind the desk, and Casey and I sat on the pretty chairs. She put her hands together and looked at us. This was Dolly, the businesswoman. My heart swelled, and I thought, this is how you build a career like hers. I talked about my goals for the album, and she nodded. How I wanted to get back to singing from the heart, not to sing to sell records, but to make people feel. I was aware that I was a pop star coming to the country world, and I wanted to be respectful of that. I said that it would be an honor to write with her. "Yeah, I'd love to," she said, "but I'd like to send you some songs too that I think you might like. Please," I said. "That would be amazing." I couldn't imagine being so talented that you had good songs that you hadn't gotten around to recording yet, but this was the woman who wrote Jolene. What? No way. Jolene. And I Will Always Love You on the same very day. So it made sense. We went into her rehearsal space and she played us songs to get a feel for what I could do. Casey and I sat on the beat-up leather couch, luxuriating in her voice as she worked to get the song right. When it was over, she gave me a bunch of demos to bring home and a big hug to keep with me. "I'm glad you're doing this," She said, "You are just so sweet and precious." I put my hand on my heart and teared up. When the door closed behind us, Casey and I looked at each other like we'd seen heaven. We were still shaking our heads when we got into the car. "It is so powerful of your idols to actually be who you thought they were," I said. "I can't believe she even met with me." "Of course she did, Jess," Casey said. "She loves you. People like Dolly Parton and Willie Nelson, they don't need a single thing from you. They're nice to you because they want to be." "I don't know why, though," I said. Casey looked at me a long time. "You're just a beat-up little bird, aren't you?" I nodded, and we drove back to our home away from home. That night, I was still flying from my time with Dolly, and I didn't know what awaited me in Nashville. The tabloids were already sneering about me going country like it was a gimmick. But so far, everyone I'd met in town had been kind to the new kid. I had been that so many times when my family moved around. And that's why I always sat in the lonely kids at lunch. I knew what it was like. Casey was right. Dolly and Willie were so kind because they didn't need anything material from anybody. They had it to give, and they'd sit with me. I was in Nashville at the time that it felt like I was raised my head to do anything in the public eye. Someone had a pea shooter pointing at me. I had started dating a nice, normal guy, Tony Romo, a quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. Around Thanksgiving, and even that was something for people to pick apart. Tony had seen my dad out a lot for about a year and had asked to be introduced. I always told my dad no, and I wasn't interested in athletes. I'm a musician girl, I said. I believed that I could only date people who could relate to me because they were in the business, which I guess was my code for I like emotional torture and fixing dark people. But I was watching SPN one day at my parents' house, vegging on the couch, and they did a little interview with Tony. They asked him something like, "Who's your dream girl?" He answered without a beat, "Jessica Simpson." My dad laughed. "Told ya," he said. I thought about it for a minute. I liked his smile, and he seemed nice. What if I went off script and took a break from Dark and Twisted? "Dad, call him." I asked. "Tell him, and I'll see him." We met in secret and hit it off. A few days later, our families both watched him win a Thanksgiving Day home game. Then all had dinner together at our hotel restaurant. He sat next to me, and near the end of the dinner, he started giving me puppy dog eyes, kind, and leaning in like he was willing his lips to mine. "Are you seriously trying to have our first kiss in front of all these people?" I asked. "Maybe," he said. "Is this what real dating was? You simply went for it?" "Well, try it," I said to him and to me. We had a very cactus kiss, and it felt right. We went public quickly, which was also new for me. I was easy. He had no interest in drama. He said the Lord's Prayer every night before bed. A solid person who was the kind of guy that, as a kid, I imagined marrying. Because we were so public from the beginning, I was very proud when he invited me to the December 16th home game against the Philadelphia Eagles. It was a Sunday, and close to 100,000 of football true believers all filed into a Sacred Church of Texas Stadium for the 4:15 game. The biggest thrill for me was that I got to bring my grandparents to sit with me. Nana and Papa kept looking around. amazed at it all. The Cowboys had a 12-2 record, but had just had a lousy game the week prior. This was a chance for redemption. I proudly wore a pink version of Tony's jersey with his number 9 on front, and there I was cheering on my guy. And he produced a play the worst game of his career. It was bad from the start. And when the camera showed me huge up there on screen, people found the reason why this guy who signed a 6-year, $67.5 million deal playing so poorly. It might be the blonde in the bleachers. Send Jessica home, the chant began. Send Jessica home. I couldn't quite make it out at first because it didn't occur to me that anybody would be giving me a role of how Cowboys were playing. If I didn't hit the note at the concert, the audience wouldn't start screaming at Tony to get the heck out of the arena. My Nana and Papa understood what was happening, some productive instinct kicking in, and their beloved Cowboys booed their granddaughter. Don't you listen to them, Nana said. I became mortified that this was happening in front of them. Can I just tell you how much I knew about football? What it's like to be the coach's granddaughter? Growing up in Texas, when there was 4 minutes and 19 seconds left in the game, Eagles running back Brian Westbrook got the ball and gained 24 yards before suddenly taking a knee just inside the 1-yard mark. Everyone around me thought he was hurt. Did I? Nope. I knew what he was up to. Dallas had no more timeouts. If he actually scored the touchdown, we might get the ball back. And if we got the ball back, we might at least go out fighting. No, he wanted us to suffer. He took a knee 3 more times, letting the clock bleed out. It was insult added to injury and humiliating 10-6 loss. And somehow it was my fault. Jinx was the word everyone used. The media was cruel. And even Tony's teammate Terrell Owens talked about me to the press. Right now, Jessica Simpson is not a fan favorite, he said. In this locker room or in Texas Stadium. He also added that the last time Tony played close to his bat was a year before, when he dated Carrie Underwood. T.O. later apologized, and I held no grudge, but people had a new villain. They printed huge photos of me and made giant popsicle sticks of my head to taunt Tony with every single game. People dressed like me and acted stupid in the crowd. I didn't want that kind of power. I found myself having to assure people that I wanted the Cowboys to win. Perhaps sensing I was vulnerable, John inserted himself into the national conversation about me because why not? He posted an open letter to the Cowboy fans of his blog, telling them that girl loves Texas more than you know. It's one of her most defining traits as a person. So please don't try to take that away from her. When Laureen, my publicist, called him to tell me what he did, I threw my phone on the couch like it was the boogeyman. I figured out Tony would get sick of people calling me a jinx and tell them to knock it off. He was constantly interviewed on the sidelines or the post-game press conferences. He could just look at the camera in the eye and tell people that he was responsible for his performance, to leave his girlfriend alone. I waited. Unwelcome at my boyfriend's game, I was free to focus on my work in Nashville and see him when we both were off. I was what I needed. I got to work with the best people, including my producers, Brett James, who wrote Carrie Underwood's Jesus Take the Wheel, and John Shanks, who worked with Stevie Nicks, Bonnie Raitt, Kelly Clarkson, and a cool girl named Ashley Simpson. At my writing sessions, I would bring my note from journals and even old emails from snuffed out flames. Like Dolly had musicians and songwriters in Nashville accepted me, making me feel like I belonged. I loved hearing about their journeys, how they would just write a song and then bring it to the famous Blueboard Cafe to test it out for an audience. Artistically, that winter was a magical time for me, but it was extremely taxing emotionally. It helped that I was in a good relationship with Tony, despite the apparent football jinx, which allowed me to write happy songs like Come On Over and You're My Sunday. But there was also a reckoning with my weaknesses and the pain I experienced. The daily writing sessions were like therapy, tearful and raw. Doing songwriting, I felt naked in front of fluorescent lights. Adrian and Cece would come to get me, and I'd get in the car all talked about at the house. I wouldn't even take off my heavy ski jacket. I marched into the kitchen, pulled down a bottle, usually Kettle One, and sat at the little desk. Night after night, I sat at my laptop going down Google rabbit's holes or Skyping with Tony. I kept the bottle next to me, drinking until I take the edge off. All those bubbling emotions to keep going until I couldn't even feel the smoothness of simply thought. I was just a body, needing to rest until my brain kicked in again. For the next writing session, Casey had never seen me like this, and Adrian didn't want to play nursemaid. It was scary. They wanted marking the liquor bottles to keep track of my drinking. This went on for some time until Adrian confronted me. I closed the door on her and later I let her drink. I was too drunk to remember that she said I needed to stop drinking so much, but I remembered it was only recently when we talked about that time in Nashville that I told her I could recall everything she had said. A lot of people, even when they're out of control, have an ability to control others. Your anxiety and your addiction team up like viruses that need to grow in the host body. You train other people to work around them, to keep their peace. I told myself that this was an extreme time to sure enough, once I was done songwriting, I didn't need that crunch of alcohol so much. There was something about getting close to all the truth that my mind couldn't handle. It was another early warning sign of what would come, but again, I ignored it. By the time I got to the recording sessions, I had worked through so much that it was the most comfortable I've ever felt. Singing in the studio, I had 3 songs the very first day, and when we did that last cut, I thanked myself for walking through the fear. Co-wrote all but 3 of the songs on the album, and decided on Dolly's song late in the game. It was called Do You Know? And I loved it so much I wanted to be the title of the whole album. It was one of the last I recorded, and I sent the finished version over to get her blessing. I wasn't about to mess up a Dolly song. She loved it so much, she asked if I would be interested in doing it as a duet. I think our voices would sound good together. Yes, was my answer. If I did nothing else with my career, Dolly Parton wanted to sing with me. One of the many benefits of Jessica Simpson collection taking off was that I could make the music I wanted, and I no longer needed a label to dedicate my every move. I could offer it to people, and if it provided a soundtrack to one of their decisions or put words to something they couldn't quite get a hold of, that's why I did it. I did it for me and I did it for them. When Do You Know came out in September. It hit #1 in Billboard's country chart. I went just about everywhere to promote the album, and it was nice to be able to be less guarded with the press. I had a simple life with a nice guy, and if people asked about my marriage or John, I could easily sidestep the question. I didn't have to do much to promote Major Movie Star, which went almost straight to DVD and Private Valentine before it came out. I held a special screening of the film and a concert for troops stationed at Camping Buhring, an army base in the northern desert in Kuwait. It was about 25 miles from the Iraq border, a stopping point for many troops on the way to their deployment, a threshold between their life at home and a life at war in the desert. I embraced my fear this time, and I made it less about my experience and more about understanding what these men and women were facing. That night I spent in the brackets with my little angel figurine to watch me. "See, Jess," I said aloud to myself, "you're growing up." In November, Tony bought a house near Texas Stadium, so I began to spend more time there when I wasn't working. I would stay with him for a few days and then go back out on the road for an event or to work on Jessica Simpson collection. When I started talking about Dallas at my home base, my friends didn't understand it, but I was trying out normal life with a truly committed relationship. If John texted or emailed, I would hold up my phone and tell Tony immediately. He knew the hold John had over me. And it was like telling your superior when you triggered. He seemed how I reacted when John randomly showed up at my parents' Halloween party in Inco. I had no idea he was coming, and I was shocked. I had gone full out, dressed in Chewbacca. From Star Wars. Fur all over my face. I was having a good time, safe with my family, and then there he was. My heart was in my chest, and I turned around, trying to blend into the crowd. A 5'3" girl dressed as Chewbacca. Not how you wanted to run into your ex with your current boyfriend standing right there. John routinely used his friendship with Ashley, then husband, Pete Witz from Fall Out Boys, as an excuse to stay in the Simpson family orbit. My parents knew what he had done to me, but John was always so charming. They also knew that I still loved John. And before I got married to Tony, I needed to either have closure or go back at it again. Tony wouldn't come out and admit it, but I know he worried I would leave him. One of the few parameters he put on the relationship was actually a big one. He didn't want me to do any movies that required an on-camera kiss, which basically ruled out any romantic comedies, the type of movie for which I'm most likely to be cast. I get it. Some people can't handle another person making out with their girlfriend, even for work. But there were only so many plunky fish out of the water stories with no male romantic leads. I think it was more about how he would be perceived than the love scene actually happening. What would people think of him for allowing that to happen? He was less vocal about his real fear that given my past and my proven ability to fall in love in the film set, I would do it again. And I didn't have a good defense for that. I'll admit, Your Honor and prescription would like to invite the following actors to stand. but I would never had done that to Tony. When my friends come to Dallas to visit, I would get them rooms at the Four Seasons Hotel at Zaza. They wonder why they couldn't stay at Tony's, since his home had 6 rooms. But I was basically living in the frat house. He had his high school buddies there, always on the couch eating pizza. I remember the moment I realized they were playing the Madden NFL video game and Tony was playing himself. It was just so bizarre. Decorating was also not his thing, and I wasn't interested in overstepping, and I didn't have time to anyway. For a long time, he had garbage bags up to the windows instead of blinds. It wasn't that he was cheap. It never occurred to him to bother. He would have 350,000 checks as bookmarks next to the toilet, leaving them uncashed. But I like the easiness of Dallas, where I rarely saw paparazzi. I spent a lot of time with my old Sunday school teacher, Carol Vanderslice. She was a non-judgmental as she was back before all the fame, and she fell back into the rhythm of me being able to confide concerns and hear back solid advice. Founded in the particular faith, she was one of the only people who knew how hurt I was that Tony refused to stick up for me. I'd taken to wear the blue jersey on the game days, and I told everyone it was that pink jersey that was cursed, not me. Things started to get better, but still, when I went to the games, I would be so tense and twisted up watching from the box that the next day I would be sore. In so many ways, we were supportive of each other, and it turned out that it was easier than you didn't do the same thing. He loved my music, and when we'd go out on the boat, I bought him. He would play my album so loud you could hear it across the lake. Then he'd sing along to the top of his lungs. If he had the guys from the team over, he would put on my music. I would jokingly hide as he wound the certain parts. He'd say to them, "Did you hear how long she held that note?" This was the kind of encouragement I was getting from the country community. I was really touched by Rascal Flatts asked me to take over for Taylor Swift as the opening act on the 20-city leg of their Bob That Head tour starting in mid-January 2009. Joining them would be such a big deal for me. It was set to start just before I had a gig in the Country Radio Festival in January 25th in South Florida. Alan Jackson would be there, along with Jason Aldean and Little Big Town. Great exposure for me with the country audience. It was an annual event, I was told. Something about a chili cook-off. And that is the end of Chapter 19 and Chapter 18, guys. I will see you guys in Chapter 20 in the next video. Thank you guys for listening.